Rudyard Griffiths here at the Hub. Welcome to Hub Hits. This is our regular show here on YouTube and over on our podcast channel where we're bringing you the best content and analysis appearing in the Hub each day from our website over to audio and video. So thanks for joining along and listening and watching. I'm joined right now by Darrell Bricker, the global CEO for Ipsos Public Affairs. He's done a fantastic piece in the Hub today that's causing a lot of buzz, analyzing the fallout of the 2025 federal election and what it says about our country, especially national unity. Darrell, great piece. Thanks for coming on the program.
Well, appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I want to start with a line off the top of your essay and have you react to it. To paraphrase a little bit here, you write, this was not a triumph for Mark Carney. This was a reordering. And if a realignment is underway, it is driven not by unity, but by fracture. Unpack what you were saying.
Well, basically, there's divisions in Canada that are both horizontal and vertical now. Some of them we're more used to, like some of the geographic divisions that we see in the country, East versus West, Quebec versus the rest of the country. Those ones we're kind of used to, the cities versus rural areas to a certain extent. But we're also running into other type of fractures that are demographic in nature. So working people versus downtown elites. Men versus women in some instances, generational changes in which, the older population this time around tended to vote more for the status quo, and the younger population voted for change. Now, normally that's from status quo from the right and change from the left, but it kind of flipped on its head this time around. So these things are not just, episodes around one specific election. They really do capture how the country is changing. And this narrative started off when John Ibbitson and I wrote The Big Shift around the time of the 2011 election to point out, the changing population patterns in the country are going to change our politics going forward, and particularly around Western Canada, because every year a greater share of the Canadian population lives west of the Ontario-Manitoba border than east of the Ontario-Manitoba border, and you've seen the effect of that a couple of times in Canadian history, but you really saw it in this particular election more than just about any other.
Yeah. So, Darrell, you've got 30 odd years of polling Canadians on their opinions on just about everything under the sun, including a whole bunch of federal elections under your belt. If I'm hearing you right, what you're saying is that while this country has always had divisions of region, of socioeconomic, demographics, whatever, your feeling, Darrell, is that it's become more acute, that this election, in your view, revealed a higher level of intensity of those divisions? Or is it not just the quantity of the divisions, Darrell, it's the quality of them also?
Well, that's a really good way of putting it. Pardon me, excuse me. That's a good way of putting it. It is, qualitative and quantitative. Canadian politics, when I first started out, had a wide range of diversity of opinions from A to B. That was it. The difference between a progressive conservative and a liberal, I know that they felt them, institutionally very intensely, but Canadian voters didn't really feel it the same way. They could vote either way depending on the leader and the policies and the issues. These days, the range has expanded. Maybe we're not all the way to A to Z, but certainly the divisions are moved to the middle of the alphabet and have become more acute and more numerous.
Let's go to another quote from your article in the Hub today at www.thehub.ca. Just check it out. Look for Darrell Bricker on our homepage. You write, Mark Carney's coalition is intellectually coherent in its opposition to Trump, but is electorally unstable and unlikely to hold if the conversation shifts. Explain that to us.
Well, what they were unified on, I've never seen a bigger difference on a major issue in an election campaign than we saw in this election. So the difference in and by the way, this is all based on data. This isn't my opinion. This is what we saw in the exit polling that we were doing on election night for Global News. The Liberals and Mark Carney led the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre by 70 points plus on who's best able to deal with Donald Trump and the trade issues that we're dealing with right now. and other issues that are related to the existential future of Canada versus the United States. He had so universally overtaken that issue that you would normally think if that's the thing that this campaign was about, he should have won a supermajority because it was really clear that he was winning on that. But the election wasn't just about that. It was also about a whole series of other issues, including affordability and making changes in the way our country is operating that does a better job of kind of representing a more diversity of interests, geographically, intellectually, politically, but also generationally in terms of the ability of the Canadian economy and Canadian society to deliver on the promise to our younger generations. And the reason that we saw younger people, particularly younger men, voting against this government was not that they didn't acknowledge that the Liberals were strong on the Trump issue, but for them, it wasn't the most important issue. It was this other series of things. So the easy media narrative on this, and we always come up with easy media narratives that tend to stick for history, as we describe certain elections as being the free trade election or whatever. Invariably, they're wrong. And one of the wrong interpretations of what happened in this election was that it was exclusively about Donald Trump and what was going on with the United States. And if that was the case, as I said before, then Mark Carney probably would have won every seat in the country, and he didn't.
Yeah.
He won a minority government, and a few thousand votes one way or the other. It could have been even the Conservatives winning a minority. So this is a more complicated outcome and does not leave us united in a coherent way. In fact, what it did was highlighted the divisions.
Yeah. Another great pull quote from your piece in the hub.ca today. Quote, "The Liberals didn't inspire the country. They spooked just enough voters to survive." That spooking, Darrell, seemed to really focus amongst this older cohort of so-called boomers, more recent and later kind of retirees. What happened there? Why was that group so galvanized in this election around the Trump issue? Because you write in this piece that what we saw in this election were phenomena that were as much cultural as they were political. And in order to understand the divisions today, I think you rightly argue that we need to kind of prompt our minds to think through not just political conflict of right and left, of conservative versus liberal, but maybe some deeper cultural splits that are starting to emerge in the country.
Yeah, so the emblematic element of moment for me in the campaign was one that took place very early, and it was the ad with Mike Myers and Mark Carney standing in their Canadian hockey sweaters at the side of a rink. Very stilted conversation, not very spontaneous, with their elbows up thing going on, and the touchstones of Canada that they decided to emphasize, like, do you know who Mr. Dressup is? That's who the Carney and the Liberal campaign appealed to. People who grew up in this country in the 70s or earlier, that those cultural touchstones, which are now being threatened by the United States, that identity that was being threatened, not just economic, but that identity aspect, they really wanted to hold on to that. So that country that they were very proud of, that really worked for them, the Expo 1967,
Yeah.
That Just Society, all that stuff that we went through in the 70s and 80s, that was the country that they really celebrated, and they felt that it was under threat. The Liberals ran an absolutely brilliant campaign, and that's what we can't lose sight of here. It wasn't just that the Conservatives didn't, live up to the moment. The Liberals pushed them into a corner by running a brilliant campaign that focused on as much on culture as it focused on anything.
Right.
And it was the protection of that Canada that you remember, the celebration of that Canada that you remember. I remember saying on the hub previously, this whole elbows up thing, these people running around doing this were probably the same people that wrote letters to the CBC back in the day complaining about them showing hockey fights. So, you really wonder about it. But the Liberals got that this was a real thing. And Mark Carney, as he went through the course of this campaign, got stronger and stronger on being able to deliver his unique qualification to deliver with this unique issue. But what I was saying in the article was this issue could disappear really quite quickly. I mean, the signals that we're getting out of the White House right now, he wants to sit down with Prime Minister Carney, who has a high regard for, this is Trump, and get this worked out, because the global economy has said basically to Donald Trump, you need to work out something on these trade issues. So we're probably going to get a trade deal, and Mark Carney will be able to brag about it, downplay the fact that, maybe there's some things that he had to give as concessions to Trump. He'll claim that, he ran it brilliantly. He delivered on what he said he was going to deliver in the campaign. And then we move on to trying to govern this really disrupted country with all of these other things that have been highlighted, which he has not claimed that he has any expertise in dealing with, that he's going to be challenged by, because there's two big existential questions for every Canadian prime minister: our relationship with the United States and national unity. And now we're going to move on to a national unity question. And what bothers me the most of the things that I've seen in the last couple of days is Yves Blanchette standing up and saying, the government doesn't have to worry about its stability for over the course of the next year, because I'm going to support them all the way. But if anybody puts a shovel in the ground to build a pipeline in Quebec, it's another story. Guess what we're right back to?
Yeah. Let's end with the last line in your great article on the hub.ca. You say that Mark Carney, quote, will need to confront something even harder, the possibility that Canada itself is coming apart. Darrell, in that doomsday scenario where the country really does start to fundamentally split, where do you see those fault lines emerging first, and where potentially do the chasms get the widest? Because I sense from talking to you over the course of the election, we really valued having you on as a regular commentator here at the Hub on all things polling and political. My sense, Darrell, is that you have a feeling that maybe we're fighting the last war often when we think about national unity, and we're not understanding some of these bigger kind of fractures that are running through the body politic at this moment.
Yeah, let me just say, when I say the challenge, it's also the opportunity. So if Mark Carney can figure out a way to, just as hopefully he is able to figure out a way to deal with the United States, to deal with the national unity questions in this country, he will end up being one of the greatest prime ministers of all time. But at this point, nobody really knows what he thinks about any of these issues, because he's not been confronted by them in any meaningful way. He's demonstrated no skills in terms of being able to deal with any of this. Maybe he has them, and we will see this. So it's both a challenge and an opportunity. But what's happened in the Canadian national unity playbook is that, because of the changing distribution of the population in the country, and because of the way that the resources of the country are allocated, and the way keeping our country together from east to west is financed, it has increased the level of power that exists in Alberta, Saskatchewan, generally in the West, but particularly in Alberta and Saskatchewan, our natural resource, basically petroleum sector exporting economies. And the amount of friction that exists between those two places, and particularly Alberta and Ottawa these days, is like nothing I've seen since the early 1980s around the National Energy Plan or Program, the NEP, whatever the correct name is for that. And the difference is that also the federal Liberals find themselves in a similar situation to where Pierre Trudeau found himself back in the 70s, where this government, and when you sit down and you take a look at the seats, their biggest gains were actually in Quebec, and they are more dependent on Quebec for their position as the government than even Justin Trudeau was dependent on Quebec. So you've got two provinces that are very aggrieved as a result of the amount of financial contribution that they make to the country, and the lack of love they get back from the federal government and from other parts of the country for that contribution, but also the resistance that they get to being able to expand their export opportunities for their main economic driver, that being oil and gas. And now you've got the leader of the other party in the province of Quebec, Yves Blanchette, standing up and basically saying to a Quebec needy prime minister, I'm going to dictate the terms of the relationship between Ottawa and Canada.
Yeah.
Now, maybe they can work out something with the NDP. Maybe they get the NDP to cross the floor. Maybe they do something else. But, there's only 7 members. It can't get you through a long period of time. So Blanchette becomes a bit more of a power broker in all of this.
Yeah.
And if his position is, in spite of public opinion that happened during the course of the election campaign, I would expect that when we get into pipelines and start dealing with that issue again in the province of Quebec, you'll see opposition in the general population for that to go back up again.
Yeah.
That's the dynamics that's really dangerous. What does Mark Carney do about that, particularly given his own stated values about net zero and the future of oil and gas?
Yeah. So much to unpack, Darrell. You did a lot of that heavy lifting today, and your excellent piece of the Hub. Listeners and viewers can check it out right now at www.thehub.ca. Just look for Darrell Bricker's essay on our homepage. Darrell, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you.
That was Darrell Bricker, Global CEO of Ipsos Public Affairs. You've been listening and watching to Hub Hits, our daily program featuring the best commentary and insight appearing across the Hub's platform. More Hub Hits coming to you shortly in the near future. Until then, bye-bye.